quick PSA before we get into the video. This video contains depictions of suicide, death, and has themes of rape and molestation. If any of that stuff disturbs you, it is better to find another video. Also, this video uses a lot of images, so the visual-only listeners you're not going to get the full story unless you watch the video itself instead of just listen to it. That's all. Hope you enjoyed. The NES, one of the most important things in gaming history. Godzilla, one of the most famous kaijus around the world. They made a game called Godzilla Monsters of Monsters and was pretty successful. Then on June 19th, 2015, the creepypasta NES Godzilla by Crosby Daft came out. Now, this video is already pretty long, so without further ado, let's get into the story. Our story begins with our protagonists reminiscing about their childhood and how happy they were to get the game Godzilla Monsters of Monsters. Despite saying it was pretty mediocre looking back on it. A year later, they traded the game for Amigon. Recently, they had purchased an NES system, and their friend Billy had managed to get a copy of the game. He also found The Legend of Zelda, Bomberman, and Action 52, but they never questioned Billy where he found them. They also said they'd play these older games to bring them back to a time where they were more simple and safe. They mentioned how the fun of the game wore off quickly because of how monotonous the game was. They reached their first boss fight, which was Godzilla, who was a squid kaiju who never made a Godzilla movie. The most annoying thing about the fight was that Godzilla would back you into a corner and stun lock you until the timer runs out. But during their playthrough, this happened. But instead of fighting or restarting after the timer, the game glitched and the screen distorted. They said it was weird and took the game out, blew on it, and put it back in. They said the glitch wasn't going to get in their way. They defeated Godzilla and Mogira, the other boss monster, without any issues. After that, they went to Mars. When looking around the board, they found something where Varan's piece should be. It was a piece representing Titanosaurus. There were only 10 kaijus in the game, and Titanosaurus was not one of them. They thought about it and reasoned that maybe Titanosaurus was intended to be in the game but was swapped out for Varan. They felt very excited about the idea because not only were they playing their favorite game, but it was also a prototype. With this idea, they ran through the level as fast as possible to fight Titanosaurus. They fought Godzilla again and defeated him quickly to prevent the glitch, but instead it occurred when it died. The sprite didn't sink to the bottom, but was instead devoured by the glitch and his eyes started covering the screen. They ignored the glitch and proceeded to Mogira, who had been glitched as well. They say Mogira was twice as tall as he should have been, and he was a lot harder to beat, but when he was defeated, another glitch occurred. They said that the sprite began to shatter and melt. There was also a bird cage in the top right corner. They made it to Titanosaurus, and they were worried that another glitch would happen, but everything was fine. He was slightly taller than Godzilla, but that was fine since it was movie accurate. After the fight with Titanosaurus, they proceeded to Pathos instead of Jupiter in the normal game. They say that the layout of Pathos was the same as Jupiter, except it was dark blue and rather than green. They noticed the usual level icons had been replaced by blue rocks and orange honeycomb shapes. They checked the other side of the board to see that the original boss monster, Hedorah, was replaced by Biollante. They mentioned that the movie Godzilla vs. Biollante didn't come out until 1989, while the game was released in 1988. They thought that Toho might have put Biollante in the game to build up excitement for the upcoming movie, but backed out. There was a different song in this level than usual. They described it as a slow and suspense with a loud clashing every 12 or so seconds, which caused a tempo change. They described it as the composer randomly played parts from 5 different songs with the same instrument. They go over to one of the blue rock icons at the start of the level. It was a blue mountain range with a blood-red planet in the background. They said the mountains looked like shredded paper and couldn't have been a glitch because it looked intentional. Another strange thing they pointed out was that there was no enemies or obstacles. They also mentioned that the point meter glitched beyond comprehension, but it didn't bother them. With nothing to focus on, they began listening to the music as they walked around. They said the music felt sorrowful and would have been very pleasant in a normal game. The level had 3 screens, but with no obstacles, they finished it quickly. They tried some of the other levels to see if enemies would appear, but there were none. When With that, they switched level type and went to the orange honeycomb levels. Levels had the same ceiling and floor, and the background had a grotesque mask of massive orange eyes. The enemies in this level were Mantico spawn, and they were everywhere. The music was a mixture of screeching sounds and loud drum beats that sounded like a monster theme in a horror movie. The map was very short, so it didn't take long until they were back with the rematch of Godzilla and Mogera, but their sprites and attack patterns changed. They fought Mogera first. They were replaced by a flying machine with a resemblance to the Pascola alien. They said it was like fighting Mothra, only it moved with more grace. It attacked by spinning its front tentacle and an eye beam that fired from its drill. Godzilla was replaced by a strange creature, and was a challenge. It was quick and would run and jump, constantly swinging its arms, making it hard to get close. And much like Godzilla, it also tried to pin you to the wall. They went to rematch Titanosaurus, but nothing happened, forced them back to the map where the piece was missing. They started the fight against Biollante, and were surprised to see that Biollante started in her rose form. In that state, she was immobile and would use her tentacles to keep him away from her body. After taking enough damage, Biollante switched to her final form. The fight was the same, except she could now move very slowly. The tentacles also did more damage, and she could now spit acid, which they had to jump over. After they defeated Biollante, the music stopped and a new icon replaced Biollante on the map. They moved on over to the new icon and started the level. They described it as a hellish-looking place with no sky and flickering fire. The music returned, but this time it was a slow, steady drum that sounded like a heartbeat. The UI elements from the top of the screen were gone and replaced by the word "run." There were no enemies in this level, which further intensified their dread. Then something appeared and hit them. There was a noise outside their room, and they checked to see if something fell. When they looked back, Godzilla was dying. They figured it was a glitch and restarted the game and went back to the password screen. They mentioned that the password screen music was really eerie and was probably meant to deter children from cheating. The game put them right back before they entered the level. They re-entered the level, making sure to pay attention. There was a low bellowing sound, and they saw the thing. Panic began to flow through their body as adrenaline started flowing. By some miracle, they managed to escape. Because the creature was very fast and seeing it almost guaranteed death, the monster was also an insta-kill creature too. They made it back to the map, and out of fear they were tempted to turn off the game and pretend that this never happened. They just had to beat the level again with Mothra, and they could move on to the next world. To their surprise, however, when they moved Mothra to the level, it counted as them beating the level, and they moved on to the next world, Trance. They were still shaken up from the previous world, and Trance did nothing to help. The music was similar to the theme from Videodrome, and that was the best comparison they could make. They checked to see who the monster was, and it was Orga, who didn't make his film debut until 2000. They began spying on what this game was, whether it was a ROM hack or Billy pulled some kind of stunt. They were pulled from the state when they noticed a new icon on the map, a question mark. Those levels are known as quiz levels, and they ask you random questions. They ask you yes or no questions, and the music is the same as when you try to use the Ghidorah cheat. There are 12 questions, and there are no right or wrong answers. Sometimes the questions are very dark. For example, do you like hurting people? Have you ever been killed? Have you ever killed/raped anyone? Or have you been molested by a family member? Some questions were dumb, such as is the sun hot, is the water wet, or does your dog like the president? Sometimes there would be a question about the game. The face in the center of the screen, called Face, would change facial expressions depending on your answer. While having no impact on the game, the faces just felt really random. The questions never had a pattern. It was never on the same subject for more than 2 questions. Some of his basic expressions were neutral, angry, if you were to attack him, sad, happy, sick, and maniacal. Maniacal, face made that face when he was being an asshole. Surprised, love, annoyed, confused, and guilty/hurt. Then there were some other ones that just showed up sometimes. They wrote down the questions from their first quiz as well as their answers and Face's reaction. The questions go as follows. Do you like the game? Answer, yes. Reaction, happy. Are you afraid? Answer, yes. Reaction, surprised. Are you over 18? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 5. Do birds have teeth? Answer, no. Reaction, love. Is peanut butter good? Answer, no. Reaction, sick. Does the moon rotate? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 11. Have you had a job? Answer, yes. Reaction, confused. Do you like hurting people? Answer, no. Reaction, annoyed. Is the sun hot? Answer, yes. Reaction, sad. Do you like dogs? Answer, yes. Reaction, happy. Is the president good? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 3. Does your dog like the president? Answer, no. Reaction, angry. After the questions, they went to the board and went to the Green Temple level. Level had a bunch of statues in the background that they call creepy because of their blank faces. There were 2 new enemies, a flying ghost with a trunk and a bat with a horse skull. Then they went into the Blue Mountain level. Expecting a calm stroll like last time, they were surprised when something appeared. The Not-Mog era came in and took off a good chunk of health, but they were starting to worry because boss monsters were never supposed to appear in the scroll levels. After another Blue Mountain level, they fought Not Varen, who they only describe as bizarre. It attacked by kicking and firing heat-seeking missiles. They also say that Not Varen was the easiest of the replacements to deal with. Next up was Not Hedora. They describe him as being the source of the horse bats and was extremely aggravating. Mostly because he would summon swarms of bats, and that would summon about 10 bats per use, and then the AI would attack twice as fast. They went into another Green Temple level and none of the bats showed up. So they thought that killing the monsters would make the red thing show. They thought that killing the monsters would make the red thing show up. They would avoid fighting Orga, and because of that, they would avoid fighting Orga and go straight to the base. The game said that there was no monsters there when they tried to start it. It immediately moved Godzilla in front of Orga, so they had to fight Orga. They said that whoever created the game was clearly a Godzilla fan, because not only did they implement Orga, but they did something he did in the movie. Orga's primary attack was a punch and a heat beam, but when you got him to half health, he would expand his jaw and try to swallow Godzilla, stealing health and energy. But that created a weakness. Firing the heat beam would do tons of damage. With Orga defeated, the red face replaced the base and the music stopped. The level was the same as before, except there are now obstacles in the level. After they had escaped, they had said, "Not this time, asshole," and then the monster turned to face them. When they got back to the game, they were very upset and confused. They started to spiral, questioning if the game could hear them or if it was sheer coincidence. Nothing about the game made sense up to that point anyway. If it was a prank, it wasn't funny in any way that they could understand. If they were trying to make a sequel to the game, why was everything else added? Maybe it was an art experiment. In the end, it was useless. The only way to truly find out what was happening was to play the game to the end, with the hope that something would be in the credits. The Dementia board music sounded like the Saturn music, except it was slowed down and played on a piano-like instrument. The theme had a dangerous, suspenseful feel that made there were 4 boss monsters on the board. There were Space Godzilla, Manda, Gigan, and Baragon. They were surprised that there were 2 new Toho monsters. They began the quiz levels and it went as follows. Can you swim? Answer, yes. Reaction, happy. Do you like fish? Answer, yes. Reaction, sick. Can penguins fly? Answer, no. Reaction, sad. Can it spin in all directions? There was no clarification on what it was. Answer, no. Reaction, surprised. Do you breathe oxygen? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 8. Does it taste good when you bite a woman? Answer, no. Reaction, annoyed. Is it night where you are? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 6. Do you like cats? Answer, yes. Reaction, confused. Is water wet? Answer, yes. Reaction, angry. Have you ever broken a bone? Answer, no. Reaction, happy. Do you like your job? Answer, yes. Reaction, hurt. Would you like a new monster? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 11. They weren't entirely sure what face meant by a new monster, but curiosity got the better of them. When they came back to the board, they had another playable monster, Anguirus. They moved Anguirus to the level right next to it, eager to test it out. Before they described the level, they described Anguirus. They said that hitting the up and down buttons allowed you to choose between whether Anguirus was standing or crawling. While overall not a huge difference, being able to stand was good for bosses, and crawling was good to avoid obstacles. He could punch and kick like Godzilla, but no tail whip. To make up for that, he had a curl, and he could curl into a spike ball and roll around. While he still took damage, the damage was less and it was effective to clear a stage, but it drained the power bar to use it. Another special ability that he had was by pressing start. When he would shoot a beam of energy from his mouth, similar to Titanosaurus' sonar attack. Now onto the levels. The levels were green versions of the Blue Mountains, but something caught them off guard was the transparency of the water. The theme for the Green Mountains was played with the same instrument as the Blue Mountains, but the melody was different. It was a simple song with abrupt pauses followed by a loud note. They strolled through the level, which was empty again, and after a bit they found an edge of a cliff that opened into water. With nowhere else to go, they went into the water and sank to the bottom. The transparency of the water made things a bit difficult to see, but still manageable. While underwater, they encountered two new enemies, a piranha and a bottom feeder thing. The piranhas weren't too hard to kill, but they were annoying and did a good amount of damage, as well as traveled in packs. The bottom feeders were also easy since they could be crushed by the roll or jumped over. After that level, they moved Godzilla to the blue castle icon when they got the text Unforgiving Cold. The level itself looked like a castle dungeon made of blue bricks with rows of identical statues on the walls. The faces had a permanent look of horror. There was also some flickering gray static, which didn't do much outside to add to the unsettling mood. The music was a 12-second loop of a low-pitched choir that sounded familiar. When they played through these levels, they felt a sudden horrible feeling of anxiety. There was the feeling that the further they went into the level, the closer they got to some kind of evil. There weren't any enemies, but those were some of the longest levels in the game. They only played one level, but it took 7 minutes. While playing the Blue Castle level, they realized that the game had the power to make the player feel certain things. Not in the sense of getting unnerved by something scary, but instead that certain events can instantly make you feel something. After the interesting encounter, they began the fight against Baragon's replacement. While Baragon was originally the smallest monster, his replacement was the largest, with the ground being noticeably lowered and his head still barely avoiding collision. And he was also frighteningly bizarre as well as he was huge. Despite not having arms, he had some of the most powerful kicks in the game and a very strange ability. In that ability, he blasts a cloudy breath of pixels which cause you to freeze. Then he walks back in the right corner and extends a Gatling gun from his abdomen. While it seems amusing, it wasn't to go against, making him unbeatable if he consistently used it. Thankfully, he only did it twice. Once you unfreeze, you can attack the gun, which does extra damage to him. After they defeated him, they moved on to the third level type. They determined that they were going to use Anguirus to fight Manda and Gigan and Space Godzilla with Godzilla. The next level type was the Arctic. It was an icy tundra with a few watery segments. The music reminded them of an 8-bit version of Northern Hemispheres from Donkey Kong Country. It's a very dangerous sounding song that made them think about being frozen to death. There were two new enemies in this stage. There was a creature frozen in ice. They block your way and you have to use your heat beam to thaw them out. They look like a smaller version of the Not-Gazor, only with one eye. When free, they do strange crawling movements and push you backwards. It doesn't cause any damage, but it is annoying. After dealing with them, they walked further for another minute or two and came upon a water segment and jumped in. The water splashed up when they jumped in as well. Also, the screen changes focus when you go underwater. Underwater, there were other new enemies who they referred to as a spike walker. They walk towards you and explode randomly or instantly if you attack them, which sends spikes in all directions. They don't do too much damage, but have a knockback effect which almost knocked them into a pit. While underwater, the game added bottomless pits to the platform sections, which weren't in the base game but were considered a neat addition. After they got back on land, they encountered a mini-boss, Magma the Walrus Kaiju. Magma's fighting tactics were very simple. He had a freeze beam, and he could charge into you. Not very challenging, but it was more entertaining than the Mantico mini boss in the base game. Also, something else interesting that they noted was that Magma doesn't die when you defeat him. Instead, he turns around and retreats. That was the first time they'd ever seen a monster change direction, let alone retreat. After that, they went to the Manda fight. Also, something else of note, the monster boss themes are reused from other themes. Titanosaurus was Kazora's music, Biollante was Hedorah's music, Orga was Baragon/Mongera's music, Manda was Varen's music, and Space Godzilla was Mechagodzilla's music. Fight-wise, Manda was a crafty opponent. Manda's attacks were fire-spitting, biting, and constricting. It didn't drain your life like Gigan's Cutter, but was his strongest attack. One interesting thing was that the Pteragon showed up during the fight. Manda crushed it with ease, but it was still cool. After defeating Manda, they played through the Arctic level for health power-ups, and then they went on their way to fight Gigan's replacement. When the fight began, nothing was there. They thought it was going to be like the Titanosaurus fight in Pathos, but just about the time it would have been going back to the map, a piranha appeared. Not long after that, an ear-splitting screech played and knocked Gigan appeared on the screen, ripping the fish into pieces. The entrance scared them and caused adrenaline to rush through their veins, which they note was a good thing because Gigan was one of the fastest and most unrelenting opponents in the game. His attacks consisted of a blood laser and a downward slash. Thankfully, there was no hellish variant of the buzzsaw attack. Anguirus' howl attack was invaluable in this fight. After that, there was one monster left, Space Godzilla. Space Godzilla's attacks were frustrating, but admittedly a very clever idea. He would use his energy to create two flying crystals, which would become crystal spires upon hitting the ground. The spires not only block you from reaching Space Godzilla, but allows him to recharge his energy and hit you with a fully charged Corona Beam until you break the spires. Space Godzilla would eventually drain the spires of energy until they broke, but by that point you would probably lose a life. The heat beams also seemed to re-energize the spires, so you had to use physical attacks. When you finally got close enough to hit him, he was not easy. When they hit him, he hit back just as hard. Space Godzilla does everything in his power to knock you back to the left corner so he can create more spires. By the time the battle was over, they had 5 life bars left, but now it was time to run. At this point, they had declared that they really wanted to see the end of the game. They also decided that they weren't going to stay a world while playing the chase level after what happened last time. This time around, they tried out Anguirus since his role allowed him to move faster than Godzilla or Mothra. This chase started out the same as the first two, except now there was a river of blood below the ground. Because there was no energy limit, they could just keep rolling non-stop and gain some ground on the monster. Like the previous levels with water, the ground inevitably stopped, and they rolled into the blood. Surprisingly, the beast didn't follow them, so they thought that maybe the monster couldn't swim, so they went under blood and continued to move. There wasn't anything around, and knew that the chase wasn't going to be that simple. Shortly after, there was a bellowing roar that sounded slightly different. The monster began following after them in a new aquatic body. After it reappeared, the chase started to get into the difficulty they had been expecting. Because they were submerged, they moved slower, putting them and the monster at the same speed, meaning the only thing that would save them were their quick reflexes and fast thinking. During the chase, there were some bottomless pits, where mines floated up from. They also assumed that hitting one would do damage and knock you back, meaning an instant death. Also during the chase, the monster revealed another trick, a tentacle formed of intestine and tipped with a claw set of jaws bursting from its mouth, trying to pull them in. After about a minute, they had spotted a bit of ground that served as the exit. Leapt with all the might that they could without breaking the controller. The monster screamed with a rage and jumped out of the blood river in one last attempt to drag them down. In the base game, the sixth world was Pluto, which, ironically, despite being the smallest planet, was the largest and most diverse. Entropy had a different layout, but was similarly huge and diverse. The board music was a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful and then got what they can only describe as distorted. They said it made them feel depressed and unnerved. None of the icons from the previous worlds were there. Instead, there were 8 new icons. Bosses this time were Megalon, Bactra, and Mechagodzilla. The first thing they did was go to the quiz level. Strangely, instead of the normal Ghidorah music, it was the password theme. They note that the music change must have been intentional because after the second question, the questions took a darker tone. The questions go as follows. Do you like ice cream? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 1. Do you like clowns? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 10. Is time slipping through your fingers? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 2. Do you have regrets? Answer, yes. Reaction, hurt. Do some people deserve to die? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 3. Is it safe to go out at night? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 5. Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 9. Have you ever killed anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 7. Do you want to kill anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, angry. Are you actually accomplishing anything? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 4. Does life have any real meaning? Answer, no. Reaction, love. Do you like Mothra? Answer, no. Reaction, maniacal. They knew the last one was going to be gameplay related, but they had no idea what the result would be. They said that nobody liked playing Mothra in the game because every time she got hit, she would slam back in the left corner, and her attacks were generally weak. The only benefit Mothra had was being able to fly over obstacles. Because of that, they had answered no, and Face responded not only with the maniacal expression, but with the text, too bad. They were taken back to the map screen, and they were shocked to see that Godzilla and Anguirus had been removed from the board. They were upset but reasoned that it was a lose-lose situation either way. They took a breath and were ready to explore. They took the bottom path, which was a good choice. First off, the level ahead of them was a forest that they said that it was an eerie feeling they got almost immediately, as if something was off more than the previous ones. Perhaps it was the pitch black background. They've always been afraid of being in a forest at night. Something about all those trees makes them feel surrounded and vulnerable. Combined with the fact that they were stuck as Mothra didn't help them. Being in control of Godzilla gave them a feeling of bravery. After all, they were controlling the king of monsters. But it's not like that with Mothra. No feeling of strength or security. Just a weak and easily overwhelmed bug. The music of the level had a few new instruments sounding like woodwinds followed by a slow rhythmic drum and chiming bells, giving them a feeling as if they were intruding in some dangerous place. Somewhere they shouldn't be. After a while, they encountered their first enemy of the level, or at least that's what they assumed they were. They were strange, long-legged, deer-like creatures. Instead of attacking, they were just idly walking around. They went to approach them and they ran away. They thought about shooting one of them with an I-beam to see what would happen, but it just seemed wrong. They were harmless. So they passed over them and continued on. About halfway through the level, they encountered groups of the deer-like animals and also 2 new creatures. A sloth-like creature with a beak climbing a tree, and a hare raptor-esque beast that was preying on the deer. They described it as surreal watching these creatures interact. They didn't feel like they were playing a video game, but instead traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored them for the most part, although the raptors did attack them if they got too close or if they attacked them first. They shot one of them to try and help the deer creature escape. They got clawed at, but they said that confrontation was easily avoided by flying up to the top of the screen. After that, they had to choose whether they wanted to play the levels with an hourglass or the TV screen. They picked the latter and got the following. When they pressed the button to start a level on the TV screen like they normally would, that animation popped up. There was also music in the background, which was the Ghidorah music that usually played in the quiz levels. They were somewhat unsettled by it because of how strange it was. They also found it a bit spooky because the shirt looked like something they had when they were a kid. After starting the animation, you could go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, they had no idea what to expect from the rest of the icons. They went to try an hourglass icon next and were relieved when an actual level popped up. Said that the level was unorthodox looking, with it being all burnt, with all brown, with clocks floating in the air, and gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen, however. Very early in the game, they encountered something they didn't expect to see: enemies from the original game. Not just that, but it was a whole fleet of them, with the yellow tanks, which were normally immobile, could now move. They took some damage, but it was nothing they couldn't handle. The most interesting thing that they found was the colored hourglass items. There were 3 of them. The blue hourglass made time slow down and filled the level with enemies from the past. The red hourglass made time speed up and filled the level with enemies from the future. And the green hourglass set the time to normal speed and filled the level with enemies from the original game. They encountered the blue hourglass first. The game slowed down and they saw enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. Level went into another segment where they encountered the green hourglass and fought the original enemies again. With it being the same ones as before, they didn't screenshot it. But the last segment, they encountered the red hourglass, and it was the future enemies. They weren't sure what the game was showing them. They weren't sure whether the game was actually showing them 8-bit renditions of creatures that would exist in thousands of years on Earth. But they said that the segment was eerie because of that. It was made more tense by everything moving faster. They point out that one of the enemies bore a striking resemblance to a creature called Troodon Man from a book they had read, while another looked like an organic spaceship. There was only one type of the fifth future creature. When it appeared, all the others ran, leaving them alone to battle it. It could fly, but the sprite didn't actually move, and its only attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. Even so, it was quite strong and could be considered a mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored health and energy that they had lost in the fight. That was convenient, and it seemed like they would need all the help they could get to beat this world with only Mothra. After the previous stage, which they call Time Warp, they moved to the next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. They describe it as a grungy and inhospitable, with all the music being a short looping ambient synthesizer song. They said that listening to the song made them feel like they had sniffed toxic fumes themselves. They said it was messing with their head and that they felt like they were choking the entirety of the level. The enemies all seemed to be mutated to some degree. Some were green mummies with bird skulls that jumped out of the waste to spit projectiles. There was also a brownish cow skeleton with spider legs. Halfway through the level, they saw one of the deer things from the forest. It was alone, and when they saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of the barrel, with an anteater-like tongue. They moved in to try and make it stop, but the flock of skullbirds came out of nowhere and attacked them. The deer got scared and ended up running off off the ground into the toxic waste. They felt bad for it. One of the birds did end up biting them, but they regained their health quickly from killing all of them. They pressed onward. They noted that all the levels in entry this was the most normal, and there was little deviance from the move forward, smash things formula from the base game. They encountered more creatures to the level, like tentacle blobs and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. They didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so they just flew at the top of the screen. At the end of the level, there was a large bluish-green lake, and there they encountered another mini-boss. It was some kind of sea monster with a long neck and a whale skull. It attacked with a mouth projectile and by charging into you. It could also go underwater and rapidly emerge from somewhere else. The boss was harder to beat than the one from Time Warp, and it had a lot of health because it must have taken them 3 minutes to defeat it. When it died, it let out a really loud noise and then sank back into the water as they left the screen. Back on the board, they went to the nearest level icon they hadn't seen yet, which was a white tree. As they had guessed, the level was a winter-themed recolor of the forest stage. Unlike the regular forest, they didn't feel unnerved at the start of the level. The music was gentle and calm, almost sounding romantic. They said it was quite stress relieving, and the forest itself looked much less ominous, covered in snow. They traveled through the first segment, enjoying the atmosphere until about 4 minutes when they realized that they hadn't seen a single creature. Soon after, they left the screen, and the next segment started. The second segment was still the winter forest, but now the music was gone. They began to feel suspicious, but reminded themselves that there were other empty levels in the game. But then they heard something familiar. It was a 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Cold starting up. They felt their hearts sink as they came across the following. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they had frozen to death. Some were also missing body parts. Before exiting the level, they were hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in a living state. And they did! It was a creature similar to the beaked sloth, except it had white fur and was more of a beaked gorilla. It moved very slowly when they saw it, but they were happy to at least see something that was alive. It wasn't for very long, though. Raptors who must have sensed that something was still alive came rushing in from the right side of the screen. The beaked gorilla didn't stand a chance, as one of the raptors immediately lunged at it and ripped open its back leg. They dubbed them winter raptors and went on to say that they acted very different from their temperate relatives. While the other raptors only attacked when hunting or provoked, the winter raptors attacked at everything. One ran back and forth, clawing at nothing. Even the noises were more high-pitched and enraged. As they left the level, they saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries and one was blinded in one eye. They moved on to the next segment, which is no longer in the forest. Instead, it was a vast, empty, grassy plain with a bright gray moon in the sky. The pleasant music from the first section had returned as well. At this point, they were beginning to feel a sense of dread because, as they put it, the game had made this level from one of their memories. After a stretch of nothing, they reached a lake where the moon moved down in the sky, cracked open like an egg, and a curled-up humanoid figure fell into the lake as the moon halves disintegrated. There was a splash when it hit the water, then a moment of silence. The screen began to shake, and a new creature emerged from the water. They dubbed this the Moon Beast. That was the only screenshot they took of it because it took so much concentration for them to win the fight. And it was the most difficult fight yet. They said that the monster would have been difficult to beat even with Godzilla, and with Mothra it was almost impossible. They considered themselves lucky because they beat the beast, because the beast didn't have any life-stealing attacks. If it did, it would have been impossible. They barely had 3 health bars left when they finally were able to defeat it. After they got their reward, with heavy quotation marks. They further go into their personal background, talking about how their middle school girlfriend, Melissa, had a mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would lose any expression she had before. When she would speak very clearly without any hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands, and remain silent for several minutes. They couldn't convey the feeling it gave them in words and wouldn't try to. They mentioned that you had to see it in person to understand. Despite that, however, she was a very kind person that they cared about dearly. They liked to hang out in the field at night and look at the stars. But one night she didn't say anything at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. They tried to talk to her, but suddenly she sprung up and ran right into traffic. They tried to stop her, but they were too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. He said that they looked into her eyes as the wheels ran over her neck. The sight haunted them. They know that the game knows about this because after they defeated the Moon Beast, the following images showed up. After that, the game went back to the board. It took all they had to not burst out screaming. Their hands were shaking so much they could barely hold on to the controller. They knew the game was going to test them if they kept playing, but they had no idea it would go so far, or it was even capable of doing what it did. They felt their brain going haywire as they asked if the game had read their mind. They determined that the game was alive and could establish some kind of mental connection between the game and the player. Despite that, they couldn't convince themselves to stop playing, and began rationalizing that decision to themselves. They set up some safety precautions in case things went bad. They had a TV remote next to them, and if that didn't work, they would pull the plug out of the wall or just run out of the room. Whatever powers the game has, it seemed to be confined to what it can show on the TV, and whatever its mental connection could do. The latter was what worried them. They still didn't know what they were dealing with. They took a break for a couple minutes to calm their nerves and went back to the game. There was a TV screen icon right before the white forest they had just left, and because the first animation was so bizarre, they figured they'd try another to see what happens. Expecting the same animation, they were surprised to see a different one. The music for this one was the Neptune board music. They suppose it was fighting since it's a fish man. They began to wonder what the point of them was. There was one more TV screen icon, so they made sure to look at it before leaving Entropy. Before that, it was time for another level. The next closest icon was the gold bricks, so they went to the level they went to the level and started it, which they dubbed the Gold Labyrinth level. Their health and power were refilled, but without being sure how or why. They were still glad that they weren't heading into the unknown nearly dead. They also note that the Mothra's bite had shrunk to half its original size. They described the music as a slow, ominous drum beat with female vocals kicking in about a minute or two into it. The level itself was an anomaly. They weren't sure how this level would have played it out if they'd used Godzilla or Anguirus, because flying seemed to be a necessity to travel. Another thing that caught their attention was that when you go left, your monster actually turns left. The level apparently got gigantic in size because every time they thought they had reached an end, or they thought they were going back to where they started, they encountered something new, such as the lava blockades, new enemies, and statue faces. They had one statue face at the dead end with a wide open-eyed stare. They also said that the night Melissa died, she had the same expression the entire time. They left the room almost as soon as they entered it, still needing to find the exit, which was no simple task. They finally found something after about 15 minutes of searching. It was a creature that wasn't gold, seemingly the only one of its kind in the level. Lacking any kind of hovering ability like the other creatures, it just walked back and forth on the platform. It wasn't long after they had found it that the flying machine swooped down and grabbed it and flew off with it. The machine hadn't seen them, so they decided to follow it and see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a random room with a large cauldron-like object in the center. The machine hovered over the cauldron and dropped the creature into it. The creature emerged from the hole in the side of the cauldron, now adorned in the same gold color as everything else. The machine flew off. They weren't really sure what to make of this, but they were glad they came upon it, because they found the exit short after. When they got back to the board, they realized that the bosses hadn't moved at all. A bit odd, but it didn't bother them. It made playing their route through Entropy easier. There were still two new icons to explore, the Indigo Cliffs and a black version of the Labyrinth. Since there were only 3 black Labyrinth icons, which were surrounded by bosses, they played the Indigo Cliffs first. They said it was similar to the blue-green mountains. Level graphics had the same shredded look to it. There was also a recolor of the clouds and the moon from the toxic waste dump. Level music was a deep rumbling noise. The first thing they encountered were multicolored creatures with big heads emerging from a small cave in the ground. They all made a synchronized shaking sound, and they walked to the right in a group after emerging from the cave. Having no other way to go, they followed them on their route. More and more emerged from the cave until the group had about 100 creatures. Eventually, the pathway ended in a cliff. They were shocked to see that upon reaching the cliff, all the creatures began jumping off. They said that they'd seen enemies walk off cliffs, but never NPCs committing mass suicide like that. They continued to fly, seeing various strange animals. They also saw another group of multicolored bobbleheads jumping up and down, only to get snatched up by large birds, which they believed to be a sprite version of the giant condor from Godzilla vs. Sea Monster. They defeated some condors, but were deeply unsettled by the fact that the bobblehead creatures were so willing to die. They questioned what would provoke them to do this, and landed on the moon in the sky. Near the end of the level, they saw yet another group of bobbleheads marching up to a large stone monster being devoured. That began to disgust them, so in an act of impulse, they fired off I-beams at both the monster and the bobbleheads, destroying the cave. The monster became angry and ran through the remaining bobbleheads to fight them. Although it lacked any ranged attacks, it was relentless but still no match for them. They had reached the bosses. Their They had reached the bosses. Their plan was to go through Batra first, then Megalon, and after that they would watch the last TV screen, play the Black Labyrinth before fighting Mechagodzilla. Lastly, they would go through the chase with the Hell Beast. First up, Batra. As expected, he started off in his larva form. The music was Varan's battle theme. To mention that the game otherwise had no rules, was consistent on the forms when it added new kaiju bosses. The first phase was pretty simple. Larva Batra attacked similarly to Magma, charging back and forth, occasionally firing lightning off its horn. During the fight, they noticed that Mothra's combat abilities had been altered in their favor. For example, the I-beams did 2 times as much damage, now being equal to Godzilla's punches. The poison powder would now actually hit an enemy when you used it, and you could fly over enemies instead of getting knocked back. Next up was Imago Batra, and it was similar to fighting a clone of Mothra, aside from the fact that Batra was stronger and faster. Despite now lacking its horn lightning, it had new, more powerful I-beam. Batra could change direction just like they could, and the battle had a lot of flipping and flying around. After they defeated Batra, they were excited to see what Megalon would look like. But before they could do that, they went to the Indigo Cliffs to get health power-ups. Megalon's battle theme was Gigan's theme, which they note makes sense because Gigan was his battle partner in his only film appearance. He was also similar to Montgera, but faster and had more weapons. He'd start out charging off with his drills. They had to fly back and forth around him, which seemed to annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd step back, turn around, and start spitting grenades that would bounce when they hit the ground. Lastly, he would spam his lightning beam, but since it only went straight forward, it was easy to duck under. Overall, they described him as strong and persistent, but dumb. There was only one boss left in Entropy, so they went to the last TV screen to see what it was. They can only describe it as unpleasant. The music for this scene was the password theme. They couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent compared to the other two. As they went to finish Entropy, they began to feel drained, as if they had suddenly become tired when they weren't before. The last level type of Entropy was the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black, and the music was the ambience from Unforgiven Cold on loop, but different. The music was the first sign that this level was going to be distressing. They traveled through the maze for about a minute and hadn't noticed any creatures hovering around. It was not a transition from the Gold Labyrinth, which was overrun with creatures, to this level that had nothing at all. Though they thought that maybe that meant there wouldn't be any obstacles and they could get through the level with ease. And then the screen went dark. Immediately they snapped out of their prior days. Everything was dark, and so the only visible thing was Mothra. They couldn't see anything, so in a panic they were running into walls and they heard a noise, something similar to a crowd running through a hallway. Along with the running came the roars, loud roaring sounds, something that could only be described as a rabid dog the size of an element screaming with fury. And whatever was making that noise, there were lots of them. They knew something was there, so they just couldn't see it until they edited their screenshot. They couldn't see anything at the time, so they were just running blind. Eventually, the beasts caught up with them, and all they could think was no. As their life bar declined rapidly, the monsters had taken half of their total health when the lights came back on, and the monsters disappeared. The challenge of this level was established. Find the exit before the lights go out and the monsters find you. They were in panic mode, and during their experience on this level, the lights burned out 3 times. The second time, they were saved by one of the wide-eyed statues. As they stayed close to it, the monsters avoided them until the lights came back. The Shadow Labyrinth was smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, taking them only 6 minutes to find the exit. But before the exit, there was a row of holes leading straight down, with no way out once you entered. You either got to the exit before the monsters reached you, or you died. Only one more boss, Mechagodzilla, and when they started the battle, they got something unexpected. Not only did their health shoot up to 100 again, but instead of a replacement boss, they fought Godzilla. But any Godzilla fan would know that Mechagodzilla started out like a clone of Godzilla, but the disguise burned away after 3 life bars. Mechagodzilla behaved like he did in the normal game, which they said felt nice to fight one of the original enemies for a change. He did have a rainbow beam and finger missiles that prevented them from trapping him in a corner and hitting him with I-beams in a spot where they couldn't be hit. But after getting him down to half health, something strange happened. His sprite glitched. In a similar way to Gazor, and after a few seconds, the glitch began to form a new shape. Thus, the game created not Mecha Godzilla, and they discovered that this visual glitch was related to the game recreating things. The human face gave it an uncanny look. It was one of the strongest replacement monsters and had the most firepower. Even though it was stronger, it was also slower than the original counterpart and couldn't jump around as much. They won the fight by constantly staying out of its fire and bombarding it with poison powder. One thing left, the Hellbeast chase. The Entropy End chase was exactly what they feared it was going to be, a labyrinth level. All the other chases were difficult while being straightforward. You just had to run forward and not get touched, but this took all the simplicity from it. There was no telling how big the labyrinth was or where the exit was, and not only that, they had to run back and forth to find their way out. But they also had to avoid getting hit by the one-hit kill monster. It didn't show up for the first 30 seconds, but they knew it was going to pick up the pace. And then they heard a flapping noise. There it was, in a flying form. It flew with bat-like wings and was fast and relentless as ever. Because they had to keep their focus on the game, they weren't able to take as many screenshots. However, they did take one of the monsters doing something interesting. They managed to lose it by going through a different path than it had expected, and was blocked off from attacking them. Or so they thought. It tried clawing through the walls for a second before opening its mouth and tearing the wall apart with its intestine jaw. But that brief period of time that the monster was held back might have been the key to help them find the exit. The path was long and complex, but from what they remember, they went up and then back towards the left. They weren't certain why they chose that way. They just say it was a lucky hunch. In the brief instant before the transition between Entropy and Exist, they were hoping that they would get Godzilla and Anguirus back. When the board appeared, their wish was only half granted. They had Godzilla, but no Anguirus. Exodus had two different colored temples, white and pink. A pyramid and what looked like some modern buildings, and two other icons they couldn't figure it out at the time. The new bosses were Kumaga and Goranosaurus, and not Ghidorah, who they were dreading to see, let alone fight. With Godzilla back, they were excited to explore, but were still cautious. They went to the quiz levels where the questions were as random as ever. Do elephants breathe? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 2. Have you ever been molested by a family member? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 6. Have you ever raped anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 8. Is green your favorite color? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 10. Is the computer the pinnacle of modern technology? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 4. Are you a tough guy? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 12. Can you fly? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 9. Can you stand on your head? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 7. Do you hate raccoons? Answer, no. Reaction, confused. Do you feel blame? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 11. Would you like a new monster? Answer, yes. Reaction, surprised. Will you miss me? Answer, yes. Reaction, sad. They were happy that they were getting a new monster, but the last question bothered them. They thought that maybe Face was referring when they finished the game, since their revelation of the game's truly otherworldly nature. They weren't sure what to think of Face or anything else. But something about that last statement gave them a feeling of sadness from Face. As they thought about it, the game went back to the board and there was a new monster. They just weren't sure who it was. Despite a slight resemblance to Rhoda, but the head was completely different. They moved the piece to the white temple icon and started the level. When they entered the level, they were met with this screen that said, "Find the gem." They presumed it was instructions for beating the level. After that, they got to their first look at the monster. It was a hairy, dark blue creature with bat wings and a skull-like face named Solomon. They noticed their path was blocked by a beam of light and a small pillar with a plate on it. There was nothing in the original game requiring you to find an item to beat a level, so they were still unsure on how they were actually going to beat the level. Solomon was interesting. He was capable of both flight and a heat beam, both of which were useful, and he could kick and slash with his wings, but he couldn't duck. The White Temple music was a vocalized inquirer or a video game approximation of such. It was hard to describe, but it had a very holy sound to it. It wasn't long before they ran into waves of strange new enemies. They did little to stop them as they ran past them, slashing and didn't take any damage. There was a pause between each wave of enemies. After you killed about 10, there wouldn't be for about a minute, and then the next wave would appear. After 5 minutes, they noticed holes in the floor and ceiling. Guillotine-mouthed creatures were rapidly flying up and down the crevices, so they had to time their jumps carefully. Luckily, they managed to get through without a scratch. Afterwards, they found themselves at the end of the hallway, facing down some kind of mini-boss. It moved fast and had a projectile that shot in 4 directions, but they killed it easily using a heat beam. When the battle was over, they had the gem, which was inside the creature's head. They found they could pick up the gem by walking over it, holding down B. They made the long trek back to the start to deposit the gem and deactivate the beam. They left the stage and were shown the strangest quirk relating to the Solomon monster. Every time you complete a stage or defeat a boss with Solomon, that screen appears. And they had no idea what "Still the Best 1973" actually meant. Neither the date or the phrase had any meaning or significance to them. At least not that they could think of. The next level they played was the Bronze Pyramids. They used Godzilla, who had leveled up to 12 since they had last played him in Dementia. The Bronze Pyramids were fairly normal as far as these levels go, but the visuals were interesting, almost unusually colorful and lively. The music was had a fittingly Egyptian style to it, being very slow and mysterious sounding. They strode through the level, fighting off various enemies. None were very difficult, except the ants could be an issue if you ran into too many at once. Their favorite enemy was the giant reptile they encountered halfway through. At the end of the level, they came to a giant pyramid and engaged in another mini-boss fight. Although this one was different because they had to fight 2 of them at the same time. Individually, it would have been easy, but fighting both of them at once was a challenge. They managed to speed things up by tricking one of them and using its flame breath into the other, by jumping when they used it. After defeating the twin monsters, they noticed something strange after returning to the board. They were able to move their monster pieces anywhere on the board without limits. Normally, Godzilla could only move 3 spaces each turn, and Mothra could move 5. They wanted to try out Solomon some more, so they moved his piece over to one of the brown pillar icons with colored dots. When they got to the level, they realized the icon represented totem poles. They were greeted by 2 at the start. The music had a Native American sound to it. It seemed to be the same instrument used in the Entropy Forest. It was notably different, but also just as foreboding. They walked around for 3 minutes with nothing in sight beside the totem poles. They didn't realize it then, but they weren't expecting another level with nothing alive in it. After everything in Entropy, while walking by the multicolored faces, it left them feeling as if they were being watched, and the overall level was unnerving. After about 10 minutes into starting Exodus, they were already about halfway through. After getting back from the totem level, they went to one of the TV screens. They said that it was even more strange than before, and the music for it was the Uranus theme. They switched back to Godzilla to play another level, and it was quite a surprise. It was a normal city level, the colors were gloomy, but even then it was still a shock. This was the kind of level they expected to see in a Godzilla game, and they were mad that they didn't get to play it earlier. The theme was Earth theme. They found it strange that a level fitting a Godzilla game would show up this late, but there was no point in complaining about it now. They moved Solomon over to the grayish-green icon, which turned out to be a giant high-tech laboratory. There were lots of mechanical drones in the level, but Solomon cleared through them just like the White Temple enemies. The music had a gritty industrial beat. There was also a strange flying cyborg enemy, which was annoying because it would fly away when you attacked it. Also of interest were large stasis tanks holding some kind of monster inside. Sometimes the monsters would awaken and shatter through the glass. They tried to get past the tanks as fast as possible because the monsters inside were vicious little creatures. At the end of the level was an elevator which they used to get to the bottom of the level where the exit was. Along the way they were shot by security drones. They couldn't leave the elevator, so their only mode of defense was the heat beam. The last type of level was the heart level for obvious reasons. The level was nothing but a big hallway filled with floating enemies shaped like human hearts. They are incapable of causing you damage, so during this level all you do is run through and smash as many things as you can to get power-ups. The Heart Temple music reminded them of a circus tune. It was overly cheerful and gave them a really weird feeling. With all that said, they fought their first boss, Gorosaurus. They fought their first boss, Gorosaurus, using Solomon. The music was Godzilla's theme. During this fight, is when they realized that Solomon was overpowered. A single well-aimed slash could take as many as 4 of the enemy's life bars. Due to that fact, the fight was over quickly. Gorosaurus had no projectile attacks or anything that could match Solomon. They kept the fight going long enough to see if Gorosaurus would use his kangaroo kick. They were pleasured when he did. They knew Solomon was their fighting ace, but they had used Godzilla to battle Kumonga for variety. They briefly considered using Mothra, but Godzilla won out. Kumonga was a simple opponent, no heat beams or anything. He attacked by jumping on you and stabbing you with his mandibles, and also used his signature webbing to stream to paralyze. Once you got webbed, Kumonga would sometimes use the opportunity to attack, but mostly it was a way to buy time. Like Godzilla backing you into the corner until your time runs out. With Gorosaurus and Kumonga defeated, they went to the end of the Exodus. Before that, they fought Nakadora. They went to the TV screen and were shown the following. They didn't think there was much reasoning behind the TV screens. If they had to guess, they'd say it was random. They said it was some random, uncontrolled manifestation of the cartridge's abilities. The theme for the scene was Saturn. The theme for the scene was Saturn's theme. It was time for the opponent they had been dreading, not Ghidorah. They had gained some courage with Solomon's combat advantages. They were still nervous. And when they started the fight, they were instantly confused. Their opponent was not Godzilla, whom they defeated in a few strikes, and then Not Mulgara appeared. Then it made sense to them. In order to get to Nakadora, they had to battle previous replacements first, and so they did. They fought their way through them until they finally made it to Nakadora, which was a Dorat. They were able to defeat it in 2 slashes, and then the music stopped. And they thought they were going back to the board, but the battle wasn't done. The real fight was against the Chimera, a monstrous hybrid of all the replacement beasts. It was the most difficult battle yet. Each one of its attacks would do a whole life bar, while Solomon's slash only did half a life bar if they were lucky. During the battle, they gained a great appreciation for 2 things: boss fight, time limit, and the Heart Temple. Had it not been for those 2 things, they might have never beaten the boss. To take it down, they had come up with a strategy. They would switch between Godzilla and Solomon. As one began to get low on health, they would take the other through the Heart Temple, while fighting Chimera with the other. Said that they should be counting their blessings, that Chimera couldn't regain lost health. Something interesting about Chimera was that the colored sections of his body corresponded to his different body parts, so each body part effectively had its own life meter. The head was invincible as long as the other parts were present, and would always be the last part to be destroyed. In addition to being difficult, it was also the longest fight so far. They tried to remember how many times they got taken out of the fight by the timer, but they lost count around 13. Eventually, they destroyed all the components but the head, which now flew around on its own incredible speed. Chimera was determined, but they were extremely determined to defeat it, and they beamed it to death. Chimera was no more, and they were exhausted after that fight, and were worried about worried this might affect their performance in the End World Chase level. The headquarters icon was replaced, but not with the Hellbeast face, but instead by a crucifix. They were stunned. They weren't excited about seeing the Hellbeast, but it was the only thing that was predictable, and now it was gone. The crucifix overall made them feel generally uneasy, and it wasn't fixed when they started the level with Solomon, and they got the text, "Solomon can't enter here." They weren't sure why. They thought maybe it had something to do with Solomon's demonic appearance. Since Solomon was out of the question, they went with Godzilla. Once, once they saw the level, the crucifix made sense. The level was a graveyard. They were still on edge, thinking it was some kind of trick. Last level had always involved running from the demonic beast, and they weren't going to be fooled into thinking this one was different. They started out running, but after a minute with no interruption, they slowed down. It was during that time that the music caught their attention. It was an 8-bit rendition of Prayers for Peace from the first Godzilla film. At 2 minutes into the level, they encountered something they weren't sure how to react to. Their first instinct was to run, but they felt compelled to just sit there and stare at it. Since they were in a graveyard and it was an angel floating over a chapel, they assumed it was some kind of angel watching over the deceased. It gave them a strange, warm feeling that they wouldn't say that they were happy, but they felt at peace. They had never seen it, yet it was so familiar. Just as they were going to leave, the Hell Beast appeared, and its presence warped the music into terrifying, discordant screeching and transformed the level, desecrating the tombstones as a new ground appeared composed of the blood-soaked bodies. They could feel their heart beating out of control, and they thought that they had no chance of escape with how close the monster was. It lunged for the kill, but the angel got in its way. The demon roared and started to claw at the angel's leg while tears of blood streamed from the angel's eyes. They wanted to save the angel, but there was nothing that they could do. They had to honor its sacrifice and run. They began to run through the hellish landscape as quickly as they could. The Hellbeast soon caught up with them after swallowing the body of the angel, whose legs had been torn off. That sight made their terror change to anger. They found themselves hating the monster. There was no doubt in their mind that it was pure evil and they wanted it dead. When they got to the end, they remembered that it responded to their insult in trance and said, "You're going to pay." It proceeded to do the following. They didn't know how they would follow up their threat, and there was nothing they could have prepared for the final world scene. They finally made it to the final world, a place that bothered them so much they didn't want to talk about it. Other worlds were frightening. Zenith was like a nightmare. They didn't have to go much further than the board screen for an indication that something was wrong with Zenith. The first thing they noticed was the blood-red texture of the board and the music, which had an eerie whistling to it. They noticed that they had both Solomon and Anguirus, which made them feel better for a second. Then they scrolled over to see who the enemies would be. This time the bosses were Destoroyah and Ghidorah, but judging from the icon, it was a different Ghidorah than the original, staying on the ground instead of flying. The grotesquely detailed pinkish red icons also caught their eye. They couldn't tell what they were supposed to be, but they were afraid to find out. Back to their side of the board, they decided that there wasn't much to do outside of their usual routine and going to the quiz levels before doing anything else. Where the following occurred. They jumped back when it first appeared, accompanied by a terribly distorted version of the password theme. It looked as if Face had fallen victim to some terrible glitch. They asked themselves if Face knew this would happen because of their last question, "Will you miss me?" Their thoughts were stopped short as the screen was glitching and seemingly falling apart while they were inactive, so they quickly rushed out. When they got back to the board, they realized they had gained a new monster. They were never asked if they wanted one, and when they tried to select it, the following occurred. The game's behavior was scaring them, and they hadn't even started the levels yet. They couldn't understand that they were given a new character that they were denied the use of. For the time being, there was little they could do, so they just viewed the last TV screen. No animations, no music, just dead. Every instinct in their body was telling them to stop playing and to turn off the game, and the game itself was trying to warn them how horrible this last world would be. But then they thought of every stretch of the way where they were compelled to give up. They couldn't do that now in the last world. And the reason that since the game had taunted them with the images of Melissa, that they felt the game owed them some answers. They noticed the first level was a red temple, so at least they would be familiar with the level graphics if nothing else. So they went to the level with Godzilla. The monsters there were mostly familiar. So they went to the level with Godzilla, the monster they were most familiar with. Godzilla had been shrunk, and the level and the score meters had vanished, and the Blue Temple statue faces were back. The music was similar to the Blue Temple, with strained, haunting vocalizations. They tried to get their spirits up by thinking about the Blue Temple, by thinking that the Blue Temple also didn't have enemies, so this one might not as well. After a short walk, however, all the statues' eyes started glowing, and back of the beast from the Shadow Labyrinth came charging in. Since they were coming from the right, they had to fight through them. The battle tested their reflexes, but thanks to their speed, they were able to get through. The monsters gave off health power-ups after dying, which helped them recover health they lost during the fight. However, as they continued through the hallway, the statue's eyes glowed again, summoning another wave. It seemed to be the same number of them, but they were less prepared this time around, and took more damage. They went through 4 of those waves until they reached the end of the hall, where they heat-beamed the last monster over the edge of the abyss. At first it appeared to be a dead end, but after the statue's eyes stopped glowing, a brick path slowly appeared before them. They followed the path until they hit a wall, where they couldn't go any further, where they had to go vertical by jumping up the ledges. Along the way, they encountered new creatures and a strange shrine, which had the statue of the Hellbeast and another creature they didn't recognize. As they went through, the path took a downward turn where they had to aim their jumps to avoid enemies, which were plentiful. While they didn't have many attacks, they could still easily shove you over the edge of a platform. At the end of the tunnel, there was a few small platforms floating above nothingness. They landed on one of them towards the left of the screen, and then something came down from above. It looked like the Blue Angel from the graveyard, except it was now red and had a skull face. The pleasant feelings they had gotten from the Blue Angel were not present with the red one, and as it hovered around, its eye sockets started glowing, just like the statues, summoning monsters to attack them. The battle was nerve-wracking as they started off with nearly half of their health and had to deal with multiple opponents, as well as the threat of gravity. To make the situation worse, as the Red Angel took damage, some of the panels fell until only 3 remained. But their luck had not run out yet. They defeated the Red Angel with one final strike. Just as the Red Angel completely disintegrated, the game instantly moved back to the Zenith board. They moved Mothra over to the nearest stage to the Red Temple, which was seemingly a garbled mess of letters spelling kill. As expected, all the graphics of the level were made of jumbled letters, and Mothra, similar to Godzilla, was shrunk to half size. I expected all the Zenith levels were going to be like this. Background music was terrible, like if someone put all the sounds an NES was capable of making and putting them into a blender and piercing them back together and calling it a song. They had to turn down the volume because of it. Playing as Mothra made avoiding the enemies a lot easier, but they were determined to get to them. The first enemies they saw were headless Gigans, and later on, they were hybrid monsters pieced together from previous bosses, like the Biollante-headed creature on the top right platform. 5 minutes had gone by, and they didn't see anything new. Then the level shifted to another segment. The music changed from the loud and annoying beeping to something far more ambient and menacing. Level graphics changed, now looking like a blood-drenched junkyard. The way that everything in the level was red made it sickening to look at. The enemies multiplied in number, never ceasing to follow after them. They became harder to avoid at the end of the level. There were swarms of monsters fused together into a terrifying hybrid. Once they made it through the initial shock, they discovered they could destroy it by shooting eye beams at the door cluster that formed its head. If you attacked anywhere else, it would just regenerate the damage. Even with the knowledge, it was still extremely difficult. It was as hard as the Moon Beast, if not harder. Its most common attack was lunging forward with its arms covered with Gigan saw blades that if they touched you, it would instantly drain health. When it was over, the remaining monsters collapsed into a heap. Then, they and the ground below them began to disintegrate and sink towards the bottom of the screen. When they made it back to the board, they thought to themselves that the game had been putting the easier levels first. If that's true here, how bad would the rest of Zenith be? With 2 levels down and 3 to go, their monsters and them had taken a foothold in the world of nightmares that was Zenith. Deciding what actions to take next was more tense and difficult than it had been before. Ultimately, they had no way of knowing what the next levels would look like or how well the monsters would be prepared for them, so their only option was to guess. They tried to interpret what the icons of the next levels ahead of them were. The last levels before the boss battles were obviously representing some kind of volcanic area with the lava and open flames. The middle icon they still didn't get, except that it looked fleshy and vaguely like an organ of some kind. It was oddly oversized as well. The one that they were nearest to, and the one that they were about to enter next, looked like thorny vines covered in a puddle of blood. You guess the level would have blood rivers like the chase in Dementia. As they went into the level with Anguirus because it was rolling, which was the fastest out of all of them while submerged. The level, which they called Blood Lake, looked like they expected. Rivers of blood accompanied by thorn-covered vines, which were scattered along the sides of the ground. Music was faint, but they could hear a distinct drum beat and a few other instruments. There were a lot of echoes, and sometimes it sounded like something was hitting a drum underwater. They were disappointed to see that Anguirus was shrunk just like Godzilla and Mothra had been. Apparently all the Zenith levels were like this. They felt less secure with their giant monsters no longer giant. They walked along without interruption for only a minute until they reached a dead end. There was a massive gap between the ground that they were walking on the right side of the screen. They would have swam across it and continued walking, but due to the huge mass of brambles, there was nowhere to go. 2 creatures were gliding membranes of their arms, and lamprey-like mouths were perched on the outstretch of the vines and screeching at them, somewhat how crows do to an invader in its territory. This was another unnerving display of a possible sentience by the creatures of the game, if it's even accurate to refer to them as being of the game. They descended into the blood, slowly sinking to the floor. Aquatic enemies were everywhere, and they were hard to avoid. The black shark in particular was very aggressive and hard to deal with. As the scene became more crowded, they swam to the surface to find it was littered with floating corpses. They thought they were creepy, but at least they weren't a threat. They thought. They all sprang to life and leaped on them. They tried to pull them under the water and drain their health as they did. They all attacked as a group, and when they got off of them, another one would jump on them from behind. They had to curl up into a ball and roll to loosen their grip, and when the creatures came off, they quickly retreated. It wasn't long before they reached another land path. Something of note about the brambles: you can stand on them, but they cause you pain, and you can destroy them, but only the thinner ones. They had to destroy multiple vines as well as dealing with more enemies. They were interrupted with the following screen. The screen was only up for about 30 seconds, then when it went back to the level, they were facing another dead end. A pregnant humanoid creature being hung from the top right of the screen by a spine/umbilical cord. Instantly, the creature's belly was split open from the inside, and as the lower parts of its body was ripped apart and fell into the river below, the Blood Lake's boss was revealed. It came flying towards them, making a shrill hacking scream. They were forced to move back. The bat was highly mobile, fast, and difficult to hit. As it moved along the ground, the monster opened up its mouth and shot a barrage of needles. They jumped over them and gave it a blow to the head, and it started flying out of its reach. As the bat was flying, it shot a stream of fire from its eye sockets and started trying to hit them. They rolled along the ground, which drained them of power, but put them at equal speed. The cycle repeated about 3 times until the monster was defeated. With most of their health drained, they went back to the edge of the level, and the large bramble vines blocking the exit was gone. There were 2 levels left to go, so they began considering who to send in. Godzilla, Mothra, and Anguirus had all completed a level, leaving Solomon and the 5th monster. They tried to access it again, but again, no luck. They chose to use Godzilla for the next level, and Solomon for the final one. The second to last level, which they will refer to as the organic level, was one of the most visually unpleasant of them all. From the start, they could see the graphics were freakishly different. The atmosphere was gruesome and foreboding, with the addition of the loud, droning music. They were dreading what they would see in those levels, but after a few seconds, something appeared. 2 hideous things. They said it was hard to describe most of that level. Everything had a disturbing, semi-real look to it. Most of the enemies were halfway between real animals and misshapen lumps of gore with teeth. It was also worth noting that all of them were considerably larger than Godzilla, and although the majority weren't very intelligent, each took around 30 or more hits to kill. Due to that, it was a better idea to run from them instead of fight, but it was never quite clear where to run to. While most levels involved going to the right to get to the exit, this level was primarily down, by walking to the edge of a platform and jumping to the lower one. There was also no way to make sure that you were going the right way, nor any means of getting back up to the higher platforms if necessary. Also, certain enemies acted as if they were aware you had to jump down and would just stand at the edge of at the lower platform waiting for you. When that happened, they would have to walk back and wait until the monster would leave. As they went on, they came across a platform stacked above each other with little space between, looking like a maze. That meant they couldn't jump, and it made escaping from enemies difficult. Thankfully, the only enemies able to fit through the mazes were the four-legged creatures from the beginning of the level. Adding to the difficulty were long tapeworm-esque monsters that would rise themselves up between the platforms and trap you. The only attack that responded to you was the heat beam, which would cause them to shrink back down. But that would cost even more power, and they couldn't afford to do without the heat beam for long. While trying to avoid the abominations that dwell in the level, they found out that if you stand idle in one place for too long, the ground would try to absorb you. They were about 4 minutes before the end of the level, and the level was making them physically sick. The tension was getting to them, and having to taking all these disgusting sights made them want to puke. They nearly paused the game to look for a bag, but they were able to hold it together. They also found a trick at the end of the level, though it was too late to do them much good. If two different species of monsters run into each other face to face, they would fight each other and leave them alone. At the end, it was time for another boss fight. It was ugly, but not quite as horrific as they imagined it would be. More important than dealing with its appearance was defeating it. And since they had half their health bar to start, there was no room for error. It was attached to the floor when they first saw it, but after 10 hits it detached from the floor and began to float. It moved fast, and unlike the Bloodlegs boss, he wasn't impeded by any sort of gravity. It was even able to fly through the ground without collision. It used it to its advantage and would float beneath the ground and spring up and randomly to bite you, but it stopped doing that after a few well-aimed kicks to the face. The pink area on its upper jaw was a weak point. Too many hits there would cause it to spasm uncontrollably. The new strategy was to rapidly float up and down while moving back and forth across the stage, trying to constantly keep his jaws aimed towards them. Health was getting critical at this point, and they spammed the heat beam, from which it had no defense. In the last stretch of the battle, the monster had lost its mind, rapidly rushing back and forth and gnashing its jaws. They had to duck under it and then strike when its back was turned. It took about 20 more hits to defeat it. One last level to go. They didn't hesitate. They selected Solomon and entered. Perhaps it was a little too fast. This last level was definitely the peak of disconnect between what the NES was graphically capable of and what the game could create. The music also caught their attention. It was one of the only songs that appeared more than once, the horrible screeching from when the Hellbeast appeared in the graveyard. As soon as the level started, there was an enemy prepared to attack. A centaur wielding a whip, and it wasn't alone. When they started fighting, several more centaurs appeared, coming from both sides of the screen at the same time. It was too much to handle. Solomon's flight saved them from taking too much damage at the start of the level. Centaurs followed after them, but they were seemingly unable to jump. After escaping the centaurs, they noticed gaps in the ground while trying to avoid the jumping sword-mouthed enemies in mid-flight. They got too close to the surface of lava, and a creature emerged and tried to grab them. It didn't succeed, but they were stalled and began carefully maneuvering to avoid instant death. As new enemies appeared, the level soon became very difficult. A lot of the trouble came from stocky red demons that stood on top of tall and narrow mountains and spewed fire. They got by them by waiting until their backs were turned and hit them with a flying kick that made them fall into the lava. It was at this point when they noticed that they weren't gaining any health from killing enemies. Not all the ground was stable. At one point, the ground was reduced to small chunks that slowly drifted towards the right. Some of them would sink to the lava upon landing on them. and there was no way to tell which ones would sink and which ones wouldn't. Being so close to lava added to the threat of the lava creatures, and this was very frustrating. They were also feeling very hot, which made concentrating hard. They described the feeling as being similar to a heat rash. They periodically had to stop for water because of it. They said that it was almost certainly due to the game and not their imagination, but they had to keep pushing the thought out of their head. At the end of the stage, they encountered the boss rising from the lava. Its arrival noted with an ungodly howling roar. When it walked on the land, they saw how gigantic it was, with it being several times the size of Solomon. They were about to fly up and attack it when it opened its mouth and let out a huge blast of fire. They had to fly to dodge the flames and then get close enough to the boss to fire a heat beam at its face, causing it to stumble backwards. If it didn't stumble backwards, then it would keep moving left until it forced Solomon into the lava. The beast had to wait between uses of its fire breath, as it seemed to cost a great deal of energy. They used this time to attack, but fire wasn't its only weapon, and they had to watch out for the monster swatting at them with its clawed hands. As its health decreased, it moved faster, and the battle felt like a tug of war between two monsters over a bridge of land. After about 40 hits, it was defeated, tumbling backwards into the lava from where it came. With that, the final stage had been completed. Finally, it was down to the two bosses and a Hellbeast encounter. For some reason, they thought Ghidorah would be easier, so they confronted him. The classic Ghidorah battle music from the original started up, and they were faced against the new King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah was as powerful and unrelenting as ever. He instantly used his gravity beams, which were more damaging than Godzilla's heat beam. It became a struggle of constantly beating Ghidorah at every opportunity to keep him from using the attack. But Ghidorah quickly saw through their tactics and started using physical attacks as well. He would strike with each of his necks, knocking them backwards, making it impossible to get close enough to punch him. But they had to wait for him to lunge out one of his heads and immediately blast him with a heat beam. It worked, and to their surprise, the heat beam had obliterated Ghidorah's middle head. It was only a few seconds before they realized what this would be, and sure enough, King Ghidorah was using the power of the glitch to transform into Mecha King Ghidorah, but something that really shocked them was the music change. It had changed to the music from the game Super Godzilla, and it was a song from the Mecha King Ghidorah fight. Mecha King Ghidorah's first attack was its most deadly, the Machine Hand. Very similar to Gigan's Saw, it immobilizes the monster and rapidly drains the health bar. Fortunately, before Ghidorah could do a lot of damage, the timer ran out. They would need to defeat Mecha King Ghidorah quickly to prevent him from using the Machine Hand. So they sent in Solomon to fight him. The two monsters were evenly matched in strength, but Solomon was faster, and by slashing and heat beaming without pause, Mecha King Ghidorah was defeated. With Ghidorah defeated, they returned to the board. They now outnumbered the new enemy monster 4-1, and victory seemed to be soon at hand. The base icon had changed to a blood-red color. They could feel hatred emanating from it. They started the fight against Destoroyah with Anguirus, and the music was the same as Ghidorah's. When the fight began, Destoroyah was in its microscopic form. After one hit, it changed to its juvenile, which had few attacks and was also dealt with easily. The fight became serious once Destoroyah entered its aggregate form, gaining the use of large arms and the micro-oxygen beam. Anguirus' roll attack, which had been very useful up until now, was rendered useless by Destoroyah constantly attacking them with his large arms when they tried to use it. For this part of the fight, they had to rely on brute strength. Just before the time ran out, Destoroyah changed into its flying form, which Anguirus was ill-suited for. Going back in, they decided to use Mothra. Mothra was weaker than Anguirus, but was much better equipped to dodge and counter flying Destoroyah's attacks. So the fight was in their favor. However, the Mecha King Ghidorah fight music started playing, and Destoroyah changed into its final form sooner than expected. Mothra's attacks were doing very little to Destoroyah, and they had to move furiously to avoid damage while stalling out the timer. Even though it would be near impossible to beat Destoroyah with Mothra, they had three other monsters. Final form Destoroyah was very resistant to damage, and the heavily armored foe would not be defeated without a long fight. In the last part of the fight, there wasn't much strategy. They were just attacking as brutally and as fast as they could. On its last bar of health, Destoroyah tried one last counterattack, a beam from its chest. They didn't know how powerful it would have been since just before they could fire, it punched Destroy in the chest cavity, destroying him. That was it. The last kaiju boss was gone. In the midst of all of the excitement, they had forgotten that there was still something left to do. Seeing the icon again hit them like a ton of bricks, and they were frozen for a few minutes. They had come so far to get to this point, but they were terrified. They had no idea what this last encounter was going to be like. Before they could let themselves think about it any longer, they moved Godzilla over and began the stage. They had said the following: "You're here now. This is the end. Just one last thing, and then it's all over." And when the screen changed, there was nothing. Just Godzilla and a black screen. They walked back and forth, fired a heat beam, and nothing happened. Until they heard something familiar. The faint sound of a familiar drum beat. Oh dear God. That was their first thought on realizing that they would have to fight Red, the creature that had been tormenting them through nearly this whole game. How are they supposed to defeat something that could kill them with one touch? It seemed impossible. Thankfully, Red was no longer able to deliver one-hit kills. Despite that, this was still the most difficult battle they've ever faced, in this game or otherwise. If they had any real comprehension of what they were getting into before the fight started, they never would have done it. They very soon learned what a horrible mistake they had made. Red reached out and clawed Godzilla, and those claws cut through him, and they felt it. They realized it was common for people to cringe up when a video game character takes a hit or loses a life, but this wasn't the same. It was real, genuine, physical pain. When the pain struck them, they paused the game, and that they hadn't suffered any actual injuries, but it was as if their shoulder had been clawed through. They had seen and experienced many unpleasant things at this point, but the game causing them real pain was where they drew the line. Yes, they would be disappointed that they wouldn't get to see the ending, but the risk was no longer worth it. They were about to get up to take one last screenshot and turn off the NES when they realized something. They couldn't get up. They were paralyzed to their seat. The only muscles they could move were their fingers and thumbs. As the terror set in, and a new message appeared on the screen. They started to scream, but only a weak choking sound was coming out. They desperately tried to get their body to move, but it did nothing. They were looking in every direction, and then they looked over at their computer. Somehow the computer was still taking screenshots of the game, on its own when they began the fight. They still had no clue how or why it was able to do this. The best explanation was that it was something in the game, since Red could hear what they were saying. They tried begging for him to let them go. From there is where things started to get hazy, as they were under extreme stress at the time. But from what they couldn't remember, they had said, I'm sorry, I insulted you, I didn't mean it, I didn't know things would get this serious. Please just let me go. If you let me go, I promise I will never tell anyone or turn this game on ever again. Please. Red replied. The mention of the last statement could not have been more clear. If they couldn't kill Red, then he would kill them. Like an idiot, they'd put around with something that they didn't fully understand, and it might cost them their life. They stopped struggling to move and accepted their reality. There was only one way out, and that was by defeating Red. It all went by quickly. If it weren't for the screenshots, they might not have remembered any of this. Just like the chase levels, Red moved horrifyingly fast. There was barely enough time to process a thought. Thus, there was no time to form a strategy. They had to rely solely on their wits and reflexes. To make things worse, there was no way to predict what kinds of attacks Red might use, so they constantly had to be on the offensive and defensive. Every hit that Godzilla took, they all hurt. They tried to avoid damage by dodging, but it always left them vulnerable to another attack. After he jumped over them, Red's eyes started glowing. They moved as far back as they could and ducked, but there was no dodging this. When that hit them, they really did scream. They screamed loud enough that someone else in the apartment should have heard them, but they didn't. They had paused the game because the burn hurt so bad, but Red unpaused the game and attacked them again. They immediately counterattacked with the heat beam again and again until the power meter was totally diminished. They wanted Red to hurt just like they did. Just before the timer ran out, Red transitioned to its swimming form. They didn't think the timer would still be affecting the battle like this. They were thankful for it, however, because it gave them a few minutes to collect their thoughts and decide what to do next. They chose to fight Red's next two forms with the monsters they encountered them with, so Anguirus was next. They know it probably wasn't the smartest idea, but it was what they did. They jumped up and heat beamed Red in the face, and he moved off screen where they couldn't reach him. Then a wave of large mines started to fall from above. They felt that this was unfair, so they shouted, "If you're going to cheat, then why do you even let me use the controller?" He came rushing from the top left of the screen downwards toward them. Now they wouldn't be able to see where his attacks were coming from. Red continued to strike from random angles as they were constantly moved or swerved around him. Another 40 seconds went by, and Anguirus was nearly gone. But together they had forced Red into his flying form, so Mothra was next. Deciding to fight Red with Mothra was a terrible idea. Mothra was instantly overwhelmed by Red, and the life meter was devastated in a mere 15 seconds. Once Mothra's life was down to 2 bars, Red did something that they didn't see coming. He reached out and grabbed Mothra and ate her. After Mothra was devoured, they felt an agonizing pain like being crushed to death. Mothra had been killed, but for their stupidity they would share the pain. It was a short transition from the battle to the board, but it felt like an hour. The pain combined with their inability to move was driving them insane. They wanted so badly for it to end more than anything they'd ever wanted. They still had hope that there was only one monster left that they could be brought to full health by engaging Red in battle. Solomon, if any of them had a chance to save their life, it would be him. Solomon apparently had some history with Red, and when the fight started, the following dialogue appeared. Red took them by surprise again and immediately burned them with his demonic fire for a second time. As much as it hurt, it actually worked to their advantage. Since Solomon started at full health, he had some to spare. But Red had used all his energy and could not use his old weapon any longer. Now he would die. As he drew close to the end of his life bar, Red turned his whole body to face the screen and flew upwards, slamming back down in an attempt to crush Solomon. When that failed to work, he tried to devour Solomon like he had Mothra, but he wouldn't be eating their monster this time. They thought they had won, but something was wrong. Red wasn't sinking to the bottom and they still couldn't move. Red was still alive. After a seeming defeat by Solomon, Red reconstructed his body into a gigantic final form, transforming them to a blazing inferno in the process. It was reminiscent of their first encounter, except now the scenery was much like the true power of Red, had become very real. The music had erupted into a loud, blaring sound, a furious drum of death. Faced against Red's insane amount of health, their own demise was imminent. Solomon was their strongest monster, but even he never stood a chance. They described it as being similar to fighting a mountain. Within seconds, Solomon was overpowered and dropped to the floor when Red crushed him to death underneath his foot. The sadistic demon took his time as he snapped Solomon's vertebrae and ribs like dry, brittle twigs. They could tell Red was enjoying their pain. They thought to themselves that it was hopeless and they were going to die. They had no choice but to send in another monster to his death. They were all going to die. They only hoped that they would forgive them. After decreasing Red's health by a minuscule amount, Anguirus was also obliterated. Red unleashed a hail of blazing hot needles into his face until he collapsed. Another moment of unspeakable agony then nothingness as their ally faded away. They asked how Red knew their name. For years, she was being tortured by something nobody understood. Now they knew what it was. Now, now they understood why they were mocked about Melissa's death and how the game knew about it. Because he knew about it. Because he was the one responsible. And this time, he wasn't going to kill them. They were taken back to the board to send Godzilla to his final stand. Barely anything was left on the board, just Godzilla and Red's icons, and the fifth monster. In the midst of everything, they had completely forgotten about it. They tried to select it, they cursed, begged, and screamed at it to do something, anything to help them, to no avail. There was only one thing left to do. They knew Godzilla didn't stand any more chance than the rest did, but maybe now that all the other monsters were gone, the fifth monster would finally awaken. They managed to get to the creature's icon and sucked it as fast as they could. The icon started to shake as if it were desperately trying to move. It was then that Red decided that he was done playing fair. And before they could activate the monster, he went for the killing blow, paralyzing their heart. Their hands started to become numb and unfeeling, but even as their vision was fading away, they still tried to press the A button. Red surely was breaking one of his rules, but he must have thought if he could kill them quickly, then it would be too late for consequences to matter. He would have won. He was wrong. Red's power was being challenged by another force. It prevented them from killing them. And when they regained their vision, they saw a familiar sight. They asked who they were. They asked how it was possible since Red had killed her. They then asked how it was possible, how they would be able to defeat him now. Her words stirred something inside of them. They weren't going to die like this. They had more to fight for than just their own life, and they had to fight to save Melissa and the world she inhabits. With her help, the fifth monster was finally unleashed. It was time to end this once and for all. Together they would take Red out of existence. Acacius was by far the strongest playable monster in the game. He had to be, if they were to have any chance of surviving. His punch involved turning his hands into blades, which caused tremendous damage, but Red had more than enough health to spare. In the end, this would come down to pure skill, with one final strike. Red was destroyed. His body disintegrated and sank below, accompanied by a soar of triumphant music. Slowly, the paralysis wore off and they were able to stand again. They had done it. Melissa's death had been avenged, and they felt overwhelming happiness, until they remembered all the death and pain that had led up to this point. All the other monsters who had fought and died. They were about to mourn them, but the game had yet to conclude. Tears of joy streamed down their face, and they broke out crying. They cried harder than they had in several years, maybe in their whole life. All they had done, all they had been through, all they had discovered, and now the game was coming to an end. But before she and the others left, Melissa had something else to say. Their name is Zachary, and at the time that they were writing this, it had been 3 weeks since the night that they played through the game. Going back to that night, immediately after they turned off the NES, once they were able to start walking around again, the first thing they did was unplug the NES, take out the cartridge, and put them in separate soft drawers. They looked over the computer. All the screenshots we had seen in the story were saved. They backed up all the images on a flash drive before they turned the computer off, just in case. After that, they had hit the bed and instantly passed out. It wasn't a restful sleep, but one of complete exhaustion. It felt like no time passed before they awoke again. Their first thought after waking up was, what the hell happened last night? They thought about it for a short while until it occurred to them to contact the person who gave them the game in the first place, Billy. So they called him and told him to come over to their apartment, which he did. They showed him the screenshots and gave him a very basic summary of what happened. At first he thought they were pulling a joke on him, but he soon realized that it was not the case. Once it hit him that this was real, he was speechless. He made it clear that he had absolutely not tampered with the game and had no idea about any of it. So then an obvious question was asked to Billy. Where did you get it from? Then they got a simple answer. Another friend of mine that I traded games with. He assured them that this was a trustworthy person and he had never had any issues with games he got from them before. So then Billy called him. But when we told this guy the story, he was shocked and surprised as anyone. Except he abruptly hung up on them. That was clearly going nowhere. Before Billy left that day, he asked them if they wanted to take the cartridge and dispose of it. They sharply declined. He asked how they could possibly still want to keep it. They told him that they needed time to think it over, and that was that. They hadn't talked to Billy much since then. Even though they told him this isn't the case, they get the impression that Billy thinks that what happened with the game was his fault. After he left that day, they did a lot of thinking. It was hard for them to do anything else. They couldn't stop thinking about the game. There was so many questions left unanswered. What was Red? Was Melissa really in the game? How did she get there? Why did all this happen with this game? But the one question that was with them for many nights was how Red said that they had known them for a long time. How? Ever since then, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The game made them ask themselves questions about death and reality in ways that they never wanted to think about. They weren't too sure of anything anymore. Constantly thinking about it soon began to have a negative impact on their life. They just didn't care about anything else at that point. By comparison, everything else seemed utterly pointless. They eventually decided that they had to choose between one of two things: try to play the game again or destroy it. They tried several times to convince themselves to try the former, but never got farther than plugging the NES back up. Just touching the cartridge made them remember all the pain they'd felt during the fight with Red. They wondered if perhaps playing the game themselves might cause something terrible to happen. They didn't know anything about how this game worked, and it was too risky. They weren't sure how they would stand another round of the game anyway. Then it was time for the other option. Wanting some fresh air, they took the game with them and drove to the lake, planning to throw it in. Then they got up to the lake with the cartridge in hand and looked down on it, and they thought of Melissa. If what they had experienced in the game was indeed genuine, doing what they did may have been the only way to save her from endless torture. In a way, this warped game might have saved her soul. Once again, that thought came into their head. They knew that they weren't going to be able to destroy it. So they just sat down on a bench gazing the lake for about an hour. Ultimately, they decided on the third option: selling the game on eBay. It may be selfish, but they promised that it had nothing to do with the money. They didn't care how much or little they got paid for the game. It was selfish because they didn't want the responsibility of owning the cartridge anymore. They cannot dwell on that forever, and the only way they deal with that is by putting the game out of their life. So this brings them to the main reason why they created this summary of these events. First is to record the details of why they can remember them, and second is that whoever bids on this game knows what they're getting into. They cannot guarantee the safety of anyone else who plays the game, or that anything else will happen at all. But to the owner of the game, remember this: be careful, and if you feel as if the game is literally messing with your mind, shut the damn thing off. That was the story of NES Godzilla. My personal theory is that it's a reference to the cycle of grief and mental health, with our protagonists having to fight through everything they had been faced with to finally and truly accept Melissa's death. This idea is also characterized by the levels themselves. Pathos represents denial, since pathos itself means a quality that evokes pity or sadness, while the protagonist is still denying that what they're seeing is more than just a glitch or a ROM hack. The level itself is alluding to that lingering feeling in the back of your mind during the denial period that is trying to get you to accept whatever has happened, while the protagonist ignores it. Same situation applies to trance, which is a sort of that transfer stage between denial and anger, which fits because trance refers to a half-conscious state, which fits because trance refers to a half-conscious state, and that mask of denial beginning to slip off. Dementia refers to a state when someone has damaged to their intellectual capacity, which includes memory loss, confusion, and emotional instability. While the emotional instability is fighting with anger throughout this chapter, they feel confused and have a constant flux of emotions ranging from happy to anxious. That influx of anger, however, comes in the next chapter, entropy, which means a state of disorder or tendency towards a state of chaos. This is where the anger comes into play, with them being forced to play Mothra, as well as the repeated allusions to Melissa, and their original breaking point with the moon and the lake. But this level also transitions into bargaining. There are several attempts to get the monsters back, or for the game to stop the allusions to Melissa. Exodus can refer to something that is beyond a certain limit or boundary, and these kinds of feelings can lead to a sense of depression. Also, certain things certain things of that nature show up throughout the level, like face foretelling of death or the presence of chimera and their almost limitless strength, seeming almost impossible. Even the graveyard sequence portrays this idea because it is the first appearance of the angel, which was revealed to be Melissa. Graveyards themselves are very depressing places, and even though through all of that, Red is still able to get through, giving him seemingly limitless control over that final level. Finally, Zenith, which means the highest point or state, or the accumulation of something. While the level itself is tied to its name, the idea of the chapter and the appearance of Red at the very end lines up pretty nicely as well, because in that cycle of grief, it isn't really a cycle or must-follow paths. Things get moved out of place, and in this instance, events get repeated. With all that said, what exactly is Red? Even with this theory, Red can be several things, but the most likely candidate, in my opinion, is suppressed trauma, potentially childhood trauma. The idea that he has been with the protagonist for a while leads to the idea that it's some kind of trauma they experienced when they were younger, and the idea that him being the one that killed Melissa lines up as well. Since Melissa killed herself, trauma is one of the major driving forces that leads people to kill themselves, which explains why Red would claim that he was the one to kill Melissa. Speaking of Melissa, I feel like she's more than the angel. I believe she is Faith, or at least to some degree. While the angel is her more physical form, Faith is the more psychological side of Melissa, with the questions valuing some kind of importance. The questions about the moon and being able to swim might be a reference to the day Melissa died. Faith asking the protagonist if they had any regrets could be a way to see if they blamed themselves for Melissa's death. And the response to yes might have hurt her a bit, if the faces are anything to go by. Because she might be under the impression that they shouldn't have any regrets because there's nothing more they could have done. This also ties into the question, do you want to kill anyone? And the answer, no, with an angry response, might be because of Melissa's potential trauma. Based on my theory, Face's questions have some sort of merit when referring to Melissa. And some of the strangest questions Face asks, where Face asks if they've been molested by a family member or if her protagonist has ever raped anyone, that might be Melissa's trauma, that she potentially was molested or raped by a family member. They can also tie into the birdcage that we saw in the Megara fight in the first chapter of the story. That little detail might be a reference to the story I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. In that story, the main character is left to deal with the trauma of being abused and raped, and that could have a similar meaning here. Was Melissa trying to get through to them that her death was not their fault? Despite that, the main character still blames themselves when they bring it up. Who is Acacius? Well, that name has a couple people tied to it. First off is Saint Acacius, who was a Christian martyr and was imprisoned during his life. It is also meant to refer to steadfast faith and spiritual fortitude. But the name also has its root in Greek, where it is related to the acacia tree, and the connection was meant to symbolize endurance, strength, and protection. Acacius in the story might be the final bit of strength Melissa was able to pull out of them and infuse into the being that was locked away until the time was right. Finally, Solomon, where my only tangible lead was the line, "Still the best," 1973, which the author has already said was a throwaway line. Despite that, I did some digging to see if I could make a hypothetical out of this, and I found absolutely nothing. The only thing somewhat relevant was that NASA sent a space probe to Mercury in 1973, but that was about it. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed this video and hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.